Welcome to another episode of Cyber Coast to Coast. I am Craig Schober, coming from the West Coast, Long Beach, California, and I'm joined here by my brother Scott.
Hey, what's up there, Craig? Great to join you for another great episode.
Good to be joined. I guess we can dispense with the formalities and get right into it. It was kind of a
Yeah.
slower week in terms of cybersecurity stories, but we do have three solid stories. So before we get to the first one, I just want to remind our audience that this episode of Cyber Coast to Coast is brought to you by Cyberlytica. Cyberlytica provides proactive cybercrime intelligence, and you can learn more about them and all their offerings at cyberlytica.com. All right, our first story. The FBI has revealed that hackers are writing code that could disrupt critical infrastructure. They released a joint advisory with the National Security Agency and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to examine these trends. One of the things that, by the way, this story came from nextgov.com by way of them. I guess one of the things that jumped out at me from this story was that it appears, based on this kind of evidence that the FBI and national NSA has been collecting, is that it's almost like the hackers are going for medium-sized targets. They're not going for the bigger targets because, like the Colonial Pipeline, for instance. That was that DarkSide, I think, the hacker group. Was that the one? I can't recall now, but there was
That was the one where the Colonial Pipeline provided information almost immediately as far as the digital wallet identities there, worked with law enforcement, and they were able to recoup like 3/4 of the money back. I think it was about $5 million initially. It was paid in ransom. They got a lot of that back, and the money was quickly laundered to multiple accounts. I think about 6 different accounts and spread out. So it's really hard to collect and get all of it back, but they did get a good percentage of it back. But I think that the key with that one, it was really one of the biggest at the time last year that made the headlines. And since it was tied to critical infrastructure and the government worked so closely with them, I think to your point there, you're right. They're kind of getting away. The cyber criminals are getting away from the really big giant targets because they're going to be scrutinized. People are going to quickly move in and catch them from the law enforcement perspective because they've got the tools and techniques to now fight back. So instead, they pick these mid-sized targets that are still tied to critical infrastructure, and a lot of them. I think it has to do with the ability where they could still disrupt business operations, the controls, industrial controls and sensors and things of that sort, not just mess around with the data. A lot of times these ransomware attacks targeting like a small business, the threat is more, hey, we got your data and it's got, social security number, credit cards, personal information, or things privy to a company and their vendors that they're associated with. Whereas if you think about critical infrastructure, that's providing service to the public, sewage, water, electric, the flow of gasoline, whatever the case may be. So anytime cyber criminals can disrupt that, it suddenly affects national security, public safety, health, and well-being. So it's really significant. So I think they just lowered their sights a little bit so they don't get caught as much, but they could still get the best return on their investment there and get money back.
Yeah, you're inundated with all these stories that you report on and write about and stuff. Correct my memory, wasn't there a ransomware group that just got shut down? Or it's almost like they went out of business. They stopped offering their ransomware as a service. That wasn't DarkSide, was it a different group? Because
Trying to remember,
I
because
thought it was connected to the Colonial Pipeline, but I'm probably mistaken there. It was a big hack, and it was all over the news. And then that group, I believe, would kind of announced not bankruptcy, but they kind of were sort of shutting down their operations. And that kind of goes to this report. Like, it seems like the biggest ones, the biggest hacks, the ones that get the most scrutiny and the most attention from the media, almost land on the heads of these hackers the hardest, because now you have multiple nations, multiple, regions and countries and administrations all kind of working together. Because when you have a large critical infrastructure or a multi-nation state hack, you get a lot of, you kind of, they become allies, and now they fight against this single hacking group. That's kind of what I'm thinking. They're sort of lowering, like you said, they're lowering their sights to medium-sized targets, because, and of course they want to make it sound like, if there's such a thing as, PR for hacking groups, they want to make it sound like, well, we're not in the business, we don't want to hurt people, we don't want people to, we don't want to create riots, we don't want to create dangerous situations for the public, like a giant attack on critical infrastructure might do. We just want to get our payday, we just want to get our money, so we're going to go for smaller targets. But of course, what's really going on is they just don't want to get caught, they don't want the pressure, and they still want to make their payday.
Yeah, I think the one group you probably were referring to, this happened back last year in about mid 2021, but it was associated. And I remember doing a story on JBS. I think the meat packing plant was tied to it, and then also Kaseya. Those both were big attacks, and that was tied to the group REvil. And that was probably like the biggest cyber criminal organization in the world at its time last year. And they're the ones that kind of went dark and just disappeared almost like overnight. It was kind of wacky. And also the beginning of last year, there was an interesting story. I think that was from The Verge. This was like January, February, sometime in 2021, that dark market, that was the largest dark web marketplace, that was taken offline by a whole giant Europol sting operation there, with Austrian and German law enforcement all work together. And the part that was cool about that is the dark market had about 500,000 users. So amazing number of transactions, doing all kinds of illicit things, selling like stolen credit cards and malware and all that stuff. And they were taken offline. So I think as we report more and more on a lot of these stories, as fast as these companies are stealing, these cyber criminals are stealing from companies and changing up their game plan, they're getting caught now, and they're being locked up, and they're facing charges, and they're recovering a lot of the stolen items and the money. And I think all of this is showing that the efforts that people are making in the community of law enforcement, even on the government side, cybersecurity researchers, reporters, investigators, even some of the stuff that we're doing, we could take maybe a small credit as helping part, is we're making a difference collectively now against cyber criminals. And to me, that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I guess it shows if they're if the NSA and other organizations are finding credible evidence and creating these reports that show that these hackers are kind of pivoting, changing business models. That means, no one, when things are working and the money's flowing in and you don't have risk, the risk is low, you don't change your business model, you keep going, and the fact that they're changing their business model does show that these efforts are effective, and hopefully we'll see them. It's a cat and mouse, and you're never going to stamp out all the criminals, but if you keep the mice running, and on the move, they will do less damage than if they're, fat and happy.
Yeah. And I don't think we want to be overly optimistic and be declaring victory here. I'm not saying that the good guys beat the bad guys. It's not saying that by any means. However, it does seem like now it's making a difference. And we're always talking to people, and I'm always constantly speaking and writing and encouraging people about good cyber hygiene and best practices, create a strong password, multi-factor authentication, keeping data encrypted, backing up data, all the basic stuff that if everybody did, I think we'd all be a lot safer. Now I'm seeing people are starting to do it. They're listening. It's resonating with them. They're working along with what's being recommended when they take out a good cybersecurity insurance policy. So the combination of doing a lot of these things is starting to make a difference. Consumers and businesses, they're getting more cyber savvy. And I think that's just a wonderful place to be, to see that change over the past, the past decade. It was looking pretty dismal from my perspective, where things seem to just get worse and worse and worse. I see a lot of the focus now also shifting more toward cryptocurrency, the exchanges, and a lot of the hacks and scams there, which in itself is monumental. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars that are being stolen and fooled out of people. However, it's a much smaller percentage of the general population. It's those that are invested in cryptocurrency that are taking the bigger hit of this, as opposed to the general mom and pop shops and, the old elderly or kids, or, any particular demographic.
Right. Well, so small glimmer of hope from the first story. Unfortunately, that takes us to our next story, which is not as hopeful.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. This one comes to us from bleepingcomputer.com, and it's sort of like an update. They do the end of the year type stuff, and this one is just looking at the year 2021, and just the US specifically, and Americans. Apparently $547 million were lost, and this lost to a specific type of fraud. And when I think of this fraud, I think of there's you always hear about phishing emails and whale phishing and spear phishing. Well, there's another one called catfishing, and that one, I don't know, did you ever watch that show? It was on it was an MTV show. It might still be on, I don't know, but I remember seeing it years ago when the term catfishing first appeared in kind of the urban dictionary, as the term of the day. It essentially, it's pretending to be someone you're not, in order to trap or trick someone into a long distance romantic relationship, or friendship in some cases too. And so you can see how, when the heart gets involved, that it's easier to get money involved. And then you say, hey, we've been friends for a long time, everything about me, we share intimate details, they might even consider themselves mates, maybe they're planning to get married soon and they still haven't met. But can you loan me $100? Can you send me some money in crypto? It's crazy when you're standing outside of this kind of pseudo relationship. It's crazy to look at and see what people fall for, but you still feel bad for them, because we all fall for a scam or a lie or something disingenuous at one time or another in our life. So you can feel empathy for these people. But you talk to people all the time about scams and about how to keep your guard up. What's like the top 3 tips you would give for people to avoid getting caught up in this, whether it's a catfish or just an email fish or whatever, what have you?
Well, first of all, I always say it always seems to come back how it's somehow tied to money. So if anybody's ever asking you, hey, could you wire me some money? I just need something, this amount of money, or send me a gift card, or send me cryptocurrency, and they tie it to a sense of urgency, high probability it's a scam. And the same thing is true if you don't know the person, you've never met them. And when I say met them, I don't mean like over social media. I mean, met them face to face, shook their hand, sat down and had stuff. Don't send them money. It's just, and it's usually disguised by a romantic interest or distraction, something like that. So those type of things are typically always a scam. I'll give a shout out to my cyber colleague, Tyler Cohen Woods. She put out a book a couple years ago. It's a really great book, Catching the Catfishers. And it helps you to learn and disarm the online predators. And it really dives into kind of that persona, what makes up a person, and understanding how they try to use different techniques to scam you, just like that TV show there about catfishers. Check that out on Amazon. I think it's got like an orange and blue cover on it, but Catching the Catfishers by Tyler Cohen Wood, a great read. And there's some great tips throughout there to really educate somebody that's not real deep into cyber, but gets a nice high level idea and some tips that you can apply in your life so you don't fall for these type of romance scams and things like that. Just to add, there's one like interesting stat after I read this article, just thinking about the demographics of the people that are targeted. It was interesting. I don't know if you noticed, it mentioned that people 70 or older, they reported the highest losses of about $9,000 that they're scammed out of for these romance scams, as opposed to somebody 18 to 29, which maybe typically people that are 18 to 29, they're more involved in relationships and dating and looking to get married and so on and so forth. They get about $750 that they were scammed out of. So what a big disproportionate amount of money that older people are being duped out of. So it just reminds me about when we talked about it a little bit in the book that you and I recently released, Senior Cyber, that people that are older, seniors, elderly, are often targeted by scams just like this, romance scams. It's one of the biggest areas where they can actually make a ton of money off of people, and it goes unreported often because people are embarrassed. They're intimidated. They get fooled. It's really a sad state of affairs, but it's happening each and every day. So I think the key is really got to be cautious. That one of the stats in there, they mentioned romance scams are up 80% just in the past year or so, from just a couple of years ago to 2017. So it's an upward trajectory. It's only getting worse. So especially you dear older ones, be careful not to be duped.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is stems from the pandemic. You got a lot of long-term, long-distance relationships going on. Some of them are legitimate, some of them not so legitimate. And also, I'd be interested to see the demographic, the targeting for our generation. We're I guess we're millennials, and it makes me. I would assume that we would be the most targeted in that. When you look at the younger set, the younger generation, I think, yeah, they rely on social media heavily for their relationship. So that's rife for targeting. But on the other hand, they're also savvy. I think they grew up with social media, and so they understand who's playing them and who's not being truthful just based on a few texts. Whereas when I look at stuff like that, I'm kind of like, I gotta break it down and look at the context and say, like, who's texting me and why, and what are they talking about? I'm not even sure. I don't even remember the last conversation I had with them. And then you look at an older demographic to counterbalance against millennials like us, and they are very trusting. They have the means, they have the funds that are targeted. But I don't know that they're on social media. I don't know that they're using computers and FaceTiming as often as we are, kind of in the middle here. So I would assume that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I would assume that we're the most, maybe not the most targeted, but we're the most vulnerable, because we're not used to vetting through digital means, but we're old enough to be using those digital means to get ourselves into trouble, whether it's a hacker scam, or some kind of fraudulent financial info, or catfish. I don't know. I'm going to keep an eye on those stats though, to see where I rank and where you rank. People our age rank in that things, because there's pros and cons to every age group that I could think of. I'm just trying to figure out who has the most cons on their side.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess if I reflect back too, if we just look at the first couple of years when we went to school, we really didn't have exposure to computers. Kids nowadays, when you're in kindergarten, first grade on up, you have not only exposure to computers, you have computer classes, and you have graphic classes, and computers are, at least in my kids' schools, and again, they're both in high school, everybody is issued a Google laptop computer. And
Mhm.
that's your personal computer that you take out and you do your homework on that. Your grades are on that. You have remote access on that. So they use that virtually when they couldn't go to school because of COVID. So they understand how to use computers and technology, sometimes to a fault. And again, maybe sometimes they're a little bit too trusting, and other times they're not trusting enough. And it does vary greatly between age groups. I think we do tend to fall like kind of in between. I often feel like where we tend to investigate something. We stop, we question it a little bit. We're not sure, is that legit or not? We
Mhm.
don't know. Whereas it seems like the younger generation can make a quicker decision. Either they just don't care, or they just point and click and move on with it and live with the consequences. I'm really not sure, but maybe it's because they don't have the connections to financial things yet. In
Yeah.
other words, once you're out of high school and now you get your own credit card, your own bank account, your own car loan, your own mortgage, you're filing taxes. When it's tied to something where it affects your pocketbook or your pocket, your wallet, you think a little differently, I think. And maybe that's part of the dynamics that we see come into play too.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of it. And it's our relationships to computers too. I mean, we had a computer club and a computer classes going all the way back into my middle school.
Yep.
But the relation to those computers weren't networked. There was no
True.
internet to speak of. So the relationship was a one-on-one, human user to computer. And now you don't really find that. You find kids with Chromebooks, and every single program they use is like a Google Sheets. It's
Yes.
some program that won't function properly unless you're connected to the internet, unless you're connected to others in your class or your teacher. And so it's that, it's the way they express themselves and the way they just basically use the computer. You got to have someone on the other end, and if that's someone on the other end, if you don't know them, then you should be skeptical and you should be very cautious, especially anything with money or meeting them in a private place where you might not be safe. And, there's a lot of things to consider that kids just don't have the experience yet that we might have.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think to some degree in that, and it's an interesting thought with kids in school that are locked into the Google ecosystem with these different Google Docs and things. It's somewhat of a silo because I've noticed a few times where I'd want to see something and my kids would have to go get their Google computer and show me their laptop. And I'm like, well, can't I just pull it up here on the internet? And they're like, no, it doesn't work that way. I don't have access to it
Mm.
that way exactly. Or why don't you just send it to your email? And they're like, oh no, that's only for within our school system. If a teacher sends me an email or I'm sending to a teacher, I can't send it outside. So it's like a intranet or something like that. So it's kind of that security by obscurity, or making it so weird that you can't really connect outside of a certain ecosystem, and it allows it to remain some level of security, I guess. So maybe there's some good things about it, but
Yeah,
it's hard when you get out into the real world. And now if you try to do things the same, guess what? You get a lot of surprises.
that's it. Well, let's move on to our third and final story here. This one I pulled from The Verge, found it on The Verge, and it's more of a I don't want to say editorial piece, but it's kind of it's an expansive piece. So I urge everyone to go to it and check it out. Their headline is feds are still using ID.me to scan your face, and its human reviewers can't keep up. I thought of this one because uh, just this week, actually, I went to. I'm trying to get involved more with community stuff and helping out and volunteering my time. So I found this really cool organization for in Long Beach here, where they uh, shelter dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, and Kelly, we're looking to get another dog and maybe foster a dog or adopt permanently, whatever. But I used to do this a little bit in Brooklyn, at the Sean Casey shelter, which was actually a private organization. And I mentioned that because this Long Beach one is kind of a state sponsored thing. And I never realized how many hoops you have to jump through in order just to volunteer your time.
Hmm.
Um, I have to go to a service called, I don't know if you heard of it, it's called Live Scan. And it's a service, I think it runs through all the FBI computers. And what they do is, they take a picture of you, they fingerprint everything, and then they run it through FBI database to make sure you don't have a criminal record, and
Hmm.
that you're being honest about who you are and your address and your physical description and all those things. Then they give it, the thumbs up or thumbs down. They share that with this particular animal shelter, and then the animal shelter says, okay, you've been cleared. Now we have to start your training for all your
Hmm.
volunteer, and this is how this is how you wash out the cages, this is how you walk the dogs, and this is how you're supposed to play with them, all that stuff. But going to this, it was kind of a public notary I went to, and they had a fingerprint scanner there, and they scanned every single one of my fingers individually, all of them together. They did my thumbs, and you have to turn your fingers in a specific way. Really, it wasn't just like, they're doing the old ink pad and taking a fingerprint and then you move on to the next thing. It was very comprehensive. And so they were, vetting me just to make sure I didn't have a criminal record. And I don't even know how much goes on for, if I'm applying for a gun permit, for instance, or something like that. I would hope that much checking out occurs.
For
Um,
background and things like that. I guess maybe
yeah.
they didn't see that you got caught years back with the laser scan.
Well, technically that was
Not on the record.
yeah, it was off record. I never got, there was no mug shot, no
Oh, that's
criminal
good.
sheet. So I got off that one free and clear. It wasn't part of my permanent record, as they say.
You're going to have
Yeah.
to share that with the audience, I think. Do we have 2 minutes to hear what
Oh,
happened?
geez. I'll try to condense it into a fast
Give her the
story.
Reader's Digest version of it.
Okay. This was back in the day. Let's see, early, probably 1990. I'm gonna say it might have been 91. It was right around the time. I was in high school, towards the end of high school. Went out with a bunch of friends, and well, before I went out, uh, Dad gifted me this laser. He had been traveling to Asia to do business. I think he was checking out the price of computer chips and buying and bringing them back and selling because it was cheaper just to do it that way. And these EPROMs chips. Anyway, he came across a red laser pointer. Um, and this, remember, like I said, this was like 1990. These things were hard to come by. They were expensive and they were pretty bulky. These were not the same laser pointers today that you can buy for $10 and put on your keychain and you can use. And, when you're teaching a class and you could point at the whiteboard with the laser pointer, and all these cat videos we see where cats are chasing lasers. It's nothing like that. This was a laser pointer the size of a, kind of a big candy bar. And it took two AAA batteries. And Dad said, hey, I picked up this laser pointer. It was probably a couple $100 he probably bought it for back then. He said, you want something to play with? Here, have fun with this. I was like, oh, great. And I started, playing with it in my room, shining it at the wall, trying to get our dog Barky to chase the laser. He wasn't very interested because he's not a cat, but but I started shining it out my window and realized, like, hey, at night, this thing actually has a decent range. This will go several hundred feet in unlit, darker areas. So I shoved it in my pocket, went out with my friends, and we went and saw a movie and finished the movie. And I remembered it was in my pocket. I didn't shine it at the screen because I didn't want to ruin the experience for everyone. And importantly, also, I didn't want to get caught because it's pretty easy to see. You can see the source of a laser sometimes,
Yeah.
especially in an enclosed environment like a movie theater. But I pulled it out of my pocket and showed it to them as we are like driving around. And next thing we knew, we're shining it out the window and we're going, on people's houses. And, it was a summer night. So some people were outside. We're shining it outside and kind of dancing it on the ground. We're going into their windows, like their living room windows, into the wall. And people are we started noticing, because we're doing slow drive by, because the whole point of doing it is to see people's reaction. And it was funny, people are like every people are just pointing at their own wall and looking. Like it was kind of like we turned everyone into a cat, because everyone was just staring at it, and they were mesmerized by this laser thing. Because again, we saw lasers in movies already, but you didn't see too many lasers in day-to-day life, especially not on your living room wall in the middle of the night. So we're doing this more and more, laughing, watching people. Some people freak out, some people run outside to see where it's coming from. We get to this one house, and there's these two guys outside working on their car, and we start shining it on them and their car. And at first I think they laughed, but then I think they cursed us out, and we just drove away. And this was kind of a cul-de-sac thing, so we were kind of had to come back. And as we passed them by again, we did it again. And that time they were like yelling and genuinely pissed off at us. And so we left it for that day. But we came back another night, after going through a bunch of houses. We did these guys again, and we probably pushed our luck and did it one too many times, because one time we drove by shining a laser at them. They threw a full like gallon jug of water at the car and hit it. It bounced off the car, and we were like, what was that? And we saw it, kind of spilling out in the road. And we drove off. But then in the rearview mirror, I was driving at the time, so in the rearview mirror I could clearly see their car. They were no longer working on their car. It was not up on blocks. It was ready to go. They jumped in their car and sped off to chase us. So now we got a full-fledged car chase, and we're
high-speed chase in Edison. Oh boy.
Yeah. And we're in a station wagon. We're in the old Ford blue and white station wagon. So we were not going to win this chase, but we gave it a try and kind of flew around in these roads. Luckily there wasn't much traffic, and there was no pedestrian traffic at all that I remember. So we drove around, probably 55, 60 miles per hour in 25 mile per hour zones, of course.
Oh, geez.
So nothing safe going on there. And these guys, we pulled into another kind of cul-de-sac and had to turn around. So they pulled their car sideways on the road to block us in, but I just drove up on the sidewalk around them and said, I'm not going to deal with this. We drove all the way out to Woodbridge Avenue, for shout out to anyone in the Edison area. And we got stuck at a traffic light. They pulled up right behind us, and there was no wiggle room. I couldn't back up or go forward really. So these guys, they freaked out, jumped out of the car, started, of course we locked the doors. They're trying to get into all the doors. They're slamming, kicking the windows, everything. They broke the windshield wiper. Finally, they went to the rear window, and I don't know what they broke it with, but I just heard, there was a big smash, glass everywhere. And the guy starts climbing into the car to get us, because they had no other way to get us, I suppose. And at that point, the cars in front of us, they had a green light. They started moving. So I just started moving the car, and the guy was hanging halfway in the car. He kind of rolled out, and I'm sure that only annoyed them further. So they jumped in their car. The chase continued, except this time there was the Edison State Police headquarters was right there. So we pulled into their parking lot. And wow. These guys never pulled into the parking lot. They knew better. They just kept driving. And so we're like, we were like, well, we're safe for now, but what are we going to do? So we don't want to go out there again. Those guys might be waiting for us, whatever. So we started banging on the doors, and the cops yelled, so like, go around to the other door. We're like, okay, it's kind of an emergency, but okay. So we went around to the front door, banged on the door, and they had to let us in. We explained not the whole story. We kind of started from the tail end of the story and slowly worked our way back to why they were chasing
incriminating
us. Yeah, exactly. And finally, after a long story of we're the victims, and these guys wanted to kill us, and now we're safe at least, and you can protect us, right? Finally it got to, well, why were they chasing you? And we revealed, well, it might have been because of this laser here. And they were like, they looked at it, they looked at me, and they're like, you're the laser guy. And we were like, what are you talking about? And he said, we've been getting reports for weeks, because we at this point we've been doing it for weeks, that someone is going around terrorizing Edison residents with this laser, and everyone assumed it was attached to a sniper rifle or whatever, and we're like, what are you talking about? We had no idea, like, there was this much this many reports going on, this much outrage and fear and all these things that they made it sound like. Who knows, I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but anyway, they said, you guys are going to have to just stay here, and we're going to have to call your parents to pick you up, and the least of your problems are these two guys chasing you, because we have a lot of other people that would love to hang you, figuratively.
Unbelievable. And didn't they, if I remember right, didn't they, I guess the call went to mom and dad, they had to come down to the police station and kind of release you, and then at that time I think they confiscated the actual laser from you too and kept it or something.
Yeah, that's part of all the I've been pulled over a few times for like just shenanigans and harmless little things, and anytime there's a device involved, anytime there's something that could cause a problem, whether it's something blocking your the driver's view, or a distracting light, like a strobe light, like that kind of thing. And yes, I've had all those things in the car going and stuff. The cops always say, yeah, we're going to confiscate that, and we're going to take you in, and we're going to ticket you, or whatever whatever the charge is. But they always confiscate any piece of contraband, I guess, as they consider it. So I never saw that laser again. I suppose I learned a lesson, but I've owned several lasers since then. I never used them in that fashion, just because I'm I love the technology, and I love playing with the idea of playing with lasers. And I got these those green lasers. I remember I brought those to Berkeley to use those for some kind of lighting situations for photography and stuff like that. And we use on our Wolfhound Pro, we have a built-in laser, so that not only will you see the direction finding listed as in terms of a measurement, but you can actually use a visual direction finding cue, and the laser will shoot in the direction of where the offending contraband cell phone is located. So there are good and bad use cases for everything, and I happened to find the bad use case for lasers on those particular evenings back in Edison in the early 90s.
Yeah, and when I think about it, just trying to put it in perspective, like if I was an Edison resident then, when you heard of a laser, you're right, you never saw of a handheld laser pointer. You always associate it with a sniper rifle, or lasers were in the early days of Goldfinger, a James Bond movie, or Logan's Run way back in like the 70s. And then in the 80s, it was like Real Genius and Tron. And then later on in Star Wars, like certain movies were known for lasers, but they weren't the type that were in little pointers that you just pointed. So what you had was kind of cutting edge at the time. And I could see why people would be scared to death. I know if I was in my house and I saw a little red dot, dancing around inside my house, I would think somebody's trying to kill me. So yeah. They got the laser sniper guy, and you live to tell about it and share the story later on.
Yeah. So sorry about the long story. I just wanted to get all the details in because I don't want to be judged, or at least if I'm going to be judged, if I'm going to be judged, I'd rather be judged on the truth and not hearsay. Yeah. So that's my version of the story, and I'm sticking to it. But back to the ID.me story, because we haven't even touched on it. We barely did anyway. Yeah. This also reminds me of the have you the past couple times I've flown out of the country for vacations, there's the area where they scan you. They do that. You put your passport in and they do the face scan. That's what that's what I think of when I think of this ID.me thing. But apparently it's not working out so well, because this is it's a private company I think it's worth over $1 billion. At least I saw something about a big round of investment they recently had, but there were also a lot of job cuts, and apparently they're having problems with their I
call it customer service type of thing, where you have a percentage of facial IDs that are problematic, and now you need assistance. It can't be, you're using something very automated
Right.
and fast. Now, when you run into a problem, it doesn't recognize a particular face or facial features, and it gets confused or it's not working right. And I think the part that kind of caught my attention, tell me if this caught your attention there, that not only the fact that this didn't exactly work too well, it was disproportionately did not work well for women or people of color, it mentioned,
Mhm.
which I think would right away be kind of offensive. Certainly, if I was a person of color or if I was a woman, I'd be like, what is this? And it doesn't work for me, but it works for, this white male perfectly. And they could, kind of
Right.
keep going and proceed through with whatever's going on. A lot of it, I think, was tied to um, insurance things, employment programs, and different things like that to speed up the process. But it sounded like that it mentioned about 10% of the users, it did not properly authenticate and ID their face properly, which is a huge. I mean, we're usually dealing with things with detection where there's an acceptable rate of false detection, but you could validate that rather quickly because with your human eyes or ears, you can, validate something or authenticate it immediately. Now, when you're doing it on a massive scale, I think they said there were 27 state level programs that were adopted. So this is massive use between 27 state level programs. It's just a lot of people, and you need a lot of bodies to provide that, I guess, support and assistance.
Yeah, it's a good example of these unintended consequences that we get when we rely a little too heavily on artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
You got to train, all AI has to be trained, because if the AI has no context for what its job is, it's worthless. It won't work for
Yep.
our purposes. So, but the problem here is you have a lot of white males training these AIs using themselves, using friends, using colleagues. And so your data pool is much broader than when you limit it and when you don't use people of color and female faces. And so the AI is only as smart as its training can be. And so I think that's part of the reason why it fell short. And I think it also fell short with the moderation part, the kind of, you always need handle massive scales of whether it's machine learning or some kind of recognition of an image. We see those CAPTCHA things all the time on Google.
Mhm.
Prove I'm a human. Those, that's just essentially a giant training center for AI, for Google's AI. And in the case of this ID.me, I don't think they were using enough human intervention to right the wrongs of the AI, to fix the problems that the AI were stumbling into. In fact, they were laying off a lot of people, and it reminded me a lot of Facebook's problems back
Yeah.
about 6 months ago. There were a lot of stories about moderators in forums and all these user groups that Facebook was just using their kind of dumb AI to look for keywords, look for users that might have violated policy without the proper context. These things, they were just shutting down, they were flagging users for the wrong reasons, and they did not have enough users not enough human moderators that would kind of stick their head into these groups occasionally and make sure that people weren't violating the content guidelines.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think understanding context is one of the biggest battles. I think back to the days of when Apple was even training Siri, and we've all seen those funny things where artificial intelligence is kind of applied to digital assistants and things like you mentioned with Facebook moderating. Nothing beats a human as far as artificial intelligence, but you can't necessarily throw thousands or tens of thousands of humans to do something that's kind of repeatable, and it gets very expensive. Although when you put a human up against a computer, the majority of time a human's instinct, I call it, or understanding of the context much quicker than a computer can actually solve things very quickly. And you get to the point where you kind of are losing, where you're saying, geez, we have such a growing customer base. We have to keep adding human bodies in here to fill in the AI component because AI can't be trained and taught fast enough. It just gets too expensive and it kind of breaks at one point, I think. And that's kind of what seems like this with regards to this story here, this ID me scanning their face, and they just couldn't keep up the humans. And the whole thing kind of fell apart or is falling apart in that process. And I think anytime you're using a huge system like these, you have a third party that comes in. It's a large contract. It takes time. It takes money. It takes a lot of hand holding to transition and learn technology. And the same thing is true when you get away from it, as they're kind of backing away from it. You can't just turn a switch and say, we're not going to use this anymore. Well, what are you going to replace it with? You still got to proceed with business as usual. And now suddenly it's really hard to keep up. And then you start to appreciate the benefits of AI and some of the automated systems that were in place when they were working. So it's a fine line that they're walking here for sure.
Yeah, we hear about these stories from time to time, like the prison systems being replaced by private industry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an argument to go both ways, but if you push technology too far too fast, it's always going to kind of butt its head up against just reality. You can't scale. In other words, these private industries can only be profitable when they could scale get enough data to train their AI and minimize the amount of humans working for them. And so you're not going to have enough human intervention, and you're going to get problems like these. And conversely, you have the government, which is generally seen as a big kind of bloated, inefficient means to get the job done. But you know what? When you have a ton of government workers working for the IRS or any kind of thing that involves a facial recognition system, you're going to be paying a lot more in salary, but you're going to be making less mistakes because you don't have an improperly trained artificial intelligence as the backbone of your entire system. And that's to me, that's what this story illustrates the best.
Yeah. Great stuff there. So really three interesting stories today. I like the diversity in them there, talking about ID me, scanning face and things like that. We talked about romance scams, which was kind of, I think certainly an interesting topic. And then even some of the changes, the shift, I should say, that cyber criminals are taking with regards to which companies they're targeting, and shifting from the big size to more of the mid size. So great conversation on this episode of Cyber Coast to Coast.
Yeah, and before we leave, let's also remind our listeners that this episode is brought to you by Cyberlytica, and Cyberlytica at www.cyberlytica.com is the place where you can learn all about their proactive cybercrime intelligence and what they do about scouring, auditing the dark web for your email address to see if it's been compromised, and your passwords and all that stuff. So I urge everyone to go check them out. And you can, they offer small business, enterprise, and even individual solutions if you want to go there and see and make sure your digital footprint is, well, I'm not going to say non-existent, but let's say minimized on the dark web, because I feel like everyone's on the dark web these days, whether they want to be or not. True. So go check them out at cyberlytica.com. You got anything before we end the podcast? You got anything coming up you could think of, or?
Just keeping really busy. I think I'm excited. We're coming out of this pandemic, and for us, the new year is always new challenges, new products that we're launching. I'm excited about our SafeHound weapons detection systems. We're doing a lot of testing there and seeing some great results there, and a lot of interest from our existing customers. We did put on this year two new distributors of our products so far, one in Switzerland, one in Nigeria, and I have a lot more distributors reaching out to looking to offer our products in different countries. So our global footprint as a company continues to grow and expand as our products are used around the globe. So I'm really excited about that, and look forward to some exciting things in 2022 here.
All right. Can't wait to bring it all via this podcast. And of course, we welcome any listeners to check out our website at bvsystems.com, and Scott Schober, SCOTTSCHOBER.com for your cybersecurity and wireless security in general, your needs. We're looking for, of course, subscribers. Send in your questions and comments for the podcast. Our audience is building. We're happy to see it, but it can always be bigger. We can always be reaching out to more. So until the next episode of Cyber Coast to Coast, this is Craig Schober signing out from Long Beach, California.
All right. And this is Scott Schober from the East Coast. Stay safe, everybody out there. Have a good one.
Cyber Coast to Coast with your hosts, Scott and Craig Schober.